TikTok was becoming a thing right around the time that I was like, okay, I'm done posting about SEAL stuff. I'm giving it up. I'm going to get like a job at, Panera until I figure out what I'm going to do. But I noticed that TikTok was becoming a thing. It's the beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, well, there's probably not any SEALs on there. It's probably just like kids doing dances. And then so I went on TikTok and kind of like, I remember I had on my computer, I had these documents, these Google documents that I learned how to use by this point.
Nice.
And I had this one sheet that had like all these ideas for like types of content I could do, and not just for TikTok, but for anything. And it was all like kind of rooted in the military, obviously, or like, patriotism. It was like all kind of stuff that was in the world of military-ish stuff. And then I had this other document that had a single word on it that I always wanted to cover this one, but I couldn't do it. It was like so random and off the wall. I was like, what are people going to think if I do that one? And it just said Dyatlov. Dyatlov standing for the very famous Dyatlov Pass. Are you familiar with the Dyatlov Pass story? Okay, well, when I tell you what I did with it, I'll tell you the story. Okay. And so I remember I've deleted all my content, the military content, and I've just built this brand new TikTok account. And it wasn't literally my first post. It was actually after several very cringy, like I'm doing like all the trends with the kids.
Oh, no.
Dude, it was so
Where
bad.
It's like and like things are popping up.
Yeah, dude, I was doing all that stuff, and I'd like watch it and be like, "This is this
that
good?
Was it getting views?
Yeah. No.
That's even worse. Can we find?
I was just like an adult, like doing these like totally lame like kid stuff.
Like this one.
The worst one the worst one I did was there was a trend where it was like you do the auto-tune voice and you like kind of half sing a story in auto-tune. It's so cringy that I can't even replicate it now. But I was doing all this horrible stuff. But finally it was kind of like, well, I tried TikTok. It's not really working. And I remember I opened my computer and I happened to have these two Google Docs up. The one of like my exhausted list of like failed content types. And then the one that was just like, it's like unsolved mysteries. And then my one topic was Dyatlov. And I was like, you know what, whatever. I'll tell the Dyatlov Pass story. And so the story goes, and this is what I told in a 60-second burst on TikTok. In the 1950s, there were these hikers, these incredibly talented hikers. There was 9 of them that were going to take what's called their level 3 hiking test, which sounds like nothing. But in the world of hiking in Russia at the time, these are the guys. These are like the professional hikers, okay? These are the people that can like scale Mount Everest. And to get your level 3 is like a really big deal. At the time, in the 1950s, they didn't have cell phones or anything. So in order for them to take the test to prove their level 3, they needed to go through a fairly treacherous route up into the Ural Mountains, which are covered in snow, very icy and steep. But they can't talk to these hikers while they're out there. And so the team that puts on the level 3 test, they organize these checkpoints throughout this stretch in the Ural Mountains that are spaced apart by like several miles. And it's just like random hikers in camps. And at certain intervals, they would have to reach these checkpoints in order to not only be accounted for, but to prove they're going the way they're supposed to be going. And so these 9 young, super athletic, super happy, and this is also very well documented. It was all filmed. There's loads of pictures. They're haunting, by the way. These 9 hikers, they take off and they begin this journey into the Ural Mountains, and they reach their first checkpoint, I believe, and then they reached this mountain pass. And a lot of this stuff is speculation, but it's believed they reached the foot of this mountain, and everything's snow. There's nothing. It's like this wide open, snowy canvas, and there's this huge mountain that's covered in snow, and there's a storm coming, and it was late enough in the day where they either had to sprint basically to get up and over the ridge to be safe on the other side, or they had to wait for the next day for the storm to pass. Because if they began going up this mountain, where they did need to go eventually, and the storm hit or it got too dark, they'd be completely like wide open. There's no trees, there's nothing stopping them. Like you never want to be on an open face of a mountain in the middle of a storm. And so they believe that the group, remember, these are highly skilled hikers. These are like the best. They decided to make the journey up this mountain, and they stopped halfway. They picked the most exposed spot ever. And so the assumption is they gambled wrong, they had nowhere to go, and so they pitched their camp, these little crappy tents, in the middle of this mountain, and they weathered the most horrific snowstorm ever. But at some point in the middle of the snowstorm, the hikers were broken up into, I think, 3 different tents. This is based on what they found. They cut their tents open from the inside, and they left like 75% of their clothes folded neatly inside of their tents. And then they walked out of their tent in a group, almost in a line, and they walked down the mountain where there was this gaggle of trees. It was, I guess you could call it a forest. It was more like crops of trees. And we don't know what they did down there, but 3 of their bodies were found up in the trees, like naked and like up on the tree. And there were all these scratch marks on the base of the tree to indicate like they had maybe even tried to go up in this tree to hide from something that was trying to attack them. Then the footsteps continued about a half mile down, like parallel with the mountain, to this cave where they found the rest of the hikers, and all of them were deceased. But the ones in the cave, they had exchanged clothing. So like the men were wearing the women's clothes, women were wearing the men's clothes, and several of them had pieces of their face. They looked like they had been bitten off, like lips, nose, ears, and some of them were radioactive, like their skin was radioactive, their clothes were radioactive. And so they're all dead. And so there's just no clue what happened to them. At the same time, the Russian military was doing an exercise in the Ural Mountains. And that night, one of the senior people of this military command noticed overhead there were all these strange lights, which coincided with where these hikers were. Like these really, think UFOs, basically. All these lights over the mountain, and he actually called it in that he thought there was potentially another military unit, like potentially an enemy, like operating in the Ural Mountains. And it was officially documented that there were these unidentified objects floating around the area where this all happened. And so when they found out that these hikers were all found dead and there was this sighting, the Soviet government, they investigated, and then their conclusion was an unknown, unnatural force killed them. Case closed. And they didn't give any more information about it. It was immediately swept under the rug, and no one was allowed to investigate it. It was literally kept under like lock and seal. And then they reinvestigated it, ironically, like literally in 2020, and they think that perhaps an ice shelf had like broken off and killed some of them, and then like extreme hypothermia could have led them to act a certain way. Yeah. But like it doesn't explain the radioactivity, it doesn't explain the lights in the sky. There's a lot of things that go unanswered. And so it ends up being this like fascinating unsolved mystery that's kind of stood the test of time. And I told that in a 60-second version with the pictures included. The pictures of the tents are totally bizarre. It looks like they folded up half their clothes and left them in their tent, cut it open, then walked off. But so I was at this indoor water park in Pennsylvania with my kids, and I shot this little TikTok video with no format. I just kind of did a 60-second version. And since we're going to be in the water park where it's wet, naturally, I wasn't going to bring my phone. So I post this TikTok, and I leave my phone in my room, and then I go with my kids, my wife, down to the water park. We're having fun. And I come back, and my phone is like practically broken. It's got so many notifications popping up on it. The video that I posted had 5 million views in like literally a couple of hours. And everything I'd posted to that point had never gotten even like 1,000 or 2,000 views. And so it was like mega virality. And like all of a sudden, and it was like I've always been so fascinated with like strange, dark, and mysterious tales. And like that story in particular always interested me. And so I was like, oh my God, like this is the coolest thing ever. It has nothing to do with like being a Navy SEAL. It's something that I'm really interested in. And I was like, dude, I'll do more of these. And so I like enacted this like really insane schedule of I posted 3 stories like that one a day for 30 days, which was, it sounds like nothing, but putting together a 60 seconds, dude, it's a beast. Yeah. Yes, but it grew my TikTok account to like 1 million followers in 30 days. And at the time, I was very likely one of the very few creators that was not doing just kind of typical trendy stuff on TikTok. You could make the case that I was one of the first big storytellers on there, and it just gave me like first mover advantage in a big way. Like TikTok's reaching out to me, and like I got my partner and my manager, and like they're all like, oh, post more content, we'll promote it. And like the account just went huge. It got to like 7 or 8 million followers really quickly. And then I was doing a live stream on TikTok. I was doing that a bunch. And I guess I brandished a weapon. That's what they told me. The algorithm said I brandished a weapon. I didn't. Yeah. I don't know how that came up, but it gave me like a 7-day ban. It was the first time from starting TikTok that I couldn't post anything. And I decided that I would shift to YouTube because it's a monetized platform, it's stable, and I've wanted to do longer form content. And so I moved to YouTube, and I posted a video that's actually my own personal like ghost story. I have exactly one. and it's barely edited. I literally sat in this room in my house that has the worst acoustics imaginable. It's this yellow, awful back. My walls are all like mustard yellow. You can like hear lawnmowers outside, and it's like unedited. I'm just like sending this story, and it went massively viral on YouTube. And it wasn't because of TikTok, because there was no one going over. This was like YouTube algorithm. You posted something and it went viral. And I think that was probably the moment. And also based on comments, a lot of people were like, who is this dude? Like, what is this? And that was probably when I realized, like, okay, the way that I tell stories works for the social media gods, for the algorithm gods. And that probably was when I was like, all right, full send, just do this now.